The PM is in town, and even though you can enjoy the kinks there, the PM has arrived, and we will be speaking to him in just a moment in the studio. But get your requests in 0487 1057. So another week and more politicians touching down in the centre on the election trail. Now, last night, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese flew into Alice, and as you have already heard, come bearing gifts, or at least a partnership agreement with the NT government and APONT, the Aboriginal peak organisation of the Northern Territory. Now they have renewed the RAIE, the NT RAE. Now it's $842 million over 6 years to continue the NT RAE. It includes continuation of essential services, remote communities, policing, women's safety, education and alcohol harm reduction. Now, the continued Commonwealth support for the NT RAE comes after the initial agreement lapsed, I think back in 2022. There was an extension, which again expired last year. So how much is new money? How much is simply an extension of the funding which was already in place but had to be agreed to again? In the studio to answer these questions, PM Anthony Albanese, good morning.
Great to be back in Alice.
Frequent flyer, which does bring me to my first point. Now, about 2 years and 2 weeks ago, it was January, late January. It was the summer of discontent in Alice Springs. Assaults were way up. Crime was way up in Alice Springs. You flew into Alice. On that day, you and the Chief Minister, Natasha Fyles, fronted the media. You essentially turned off the grog taps with agreement with the Northern Territory government on that day. A few weeks later, you announced the plan for Central Australia, up to $300 million now. I think it's been expended on that.
Yep.
How much safer is Alice Springs now than it was 2 years ago?
Well, I don't think someone flies into Canberra and tells Alice Springs what it's like here on the ground in Alice Springs. What we know is that we're working across the board to make Alice Springs safer, and we want every community to be safe.
But you came specifically to Alice Springs on that day, of course.
We did, and we provided the funding. One of the issues that remains, I've got to say, is workforce issues, attracting people to fill those positions. The funding's available. And one of the great things about today's announcement is that you have the Commonwealth, the NT government, the Chief Minister I met with this morning, and she was there to sign, John Patterson from APONT was there as well. You have Indigenous ownership, if you like, of the program, the fact that it's been negotiated through. For 6 years, we'll provide that funding certainty. I've been to Alice Springs now on 3 of the occasions on my 13 visits to the Northern Territory as Prime Minister, more than any Prime Minister has ever been here in one term. And I was shocked, frankly, that when we were looking at what was happening here, a range of community services funding was due to just drop off the cliff on June 30. And that's why providing this funding certainty will allow community-based organisations to be able to deliver their services. Now, this morning we just had the press conference at Congress, and when I came here as well before the election, it was just a concrete slab. The structure will be open in June or July. What's important there is the work that takes place from the people who will deliver services from that location.
And I know you were there with the Chief Minister. Now, if you speak to people, a lot of people say that this summer has been better than the last 2 summers. A lot of it has been put down to the policing policies of the 𝙳𝙃𝙗𝙗 government. Have you had a chance to say to Leah 𝙳𝙃𝙗𝙗 that good job done, given that crime seems to have come down over this summer as opposed to the last 2 summers?
Well, we've done, for example, one of the things that has made a difference, and the Chief Minister has praised this, including this morning, is that we delivered, the Commonwealth, we changed the CASA regulations, so the use of drones.
Now, that was only one of 7
police.
requests from the Northern Territory government. Will you deliver the other 6 requests?
That's done. Some of those requests required the NT government to act, something that...
Centrelink payments on Monday or Tuesday.
That the Chief Minister said. What we do is we space out the Centrelink payments, so they're not all in one hit on one day. We do that right around the country. There are a range of efficiency reasons why that happens. The NT government are, of course, responsible for alcohol restrictions. On issues, for example, like the referral of people to Centrelink for payments where there's an issue of family violence, that's available right now. That doesn't need any changes. That occurs in terms of income management issues. And Amanda Rishworth, the minister, who's one of the ministers who's been here recently, along with Mark Butler, the health minister, and others as well, that's in place.
Can I go to something, and this relates to income management and to the basics card? In the election campaign, the last federal election campaign, Labor promised to make compulsory income management voluntary. That has never happened. Why did that never happen? Because it was a promise made by your government in the run-up to the last election. It did not happen. Why did it not happen?
Well, we're working through issues in a practical way.
And that's 3 years ago. That promise was made 3 years ago.
That's right. We're working through issues in a practical way in order to make a practical difference.
So will you promise to make income management voluntary next term of government if Labor wins?
No, what we'll do is we'll make our announcements when they're made, and Amanda Rishworth will do that. We'll work through these challenges, which are there. We're dealing with, next week will be the Closing the Gap statements, will be made in our national parliament. The truth is that of those targets, under 1/3 of them have been met or on track.
No, but the question was about income management. The question was about income management.
All of these issues are complex. They need to be dealt with. You're dealing with intergenerational issues of disadvantage.
So you were wrong to make that election promise last time because you did not follow through.
No. What we're right to do is to ensure that everything that we do makes a positive difference. That is precisely what our approach has been. My government is a hands-on, practical government, whether it be the increased funding that we've announced today, $842 million for that certainty, whether it be the 30% increase, year on year, 30% increase in hospitals funding that we announced just 2 days ago for the Northern Territory, whether it be the schools funding agreement, whether it be the additional money for remote housing, or whether it be our real jobs plan in remote areas, which will also make a difference. Real jobs, real training, real wages.
You're hearing from the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. Let's look at the NT-RAY agreement. Now, the NT-RAY was an agreement which has been going since 2015, 2016. It has been an agreement where the Commonwealth provides funding to the Northern Territory government. We have a new agreement which involves APONT, so there's an Aboriginal involvement in this agreement, which there wasn't. But essentially, this is a continuation of an agreement which already existed. So what's the big deal?
No, it's not.
It's a new agreement, but this agreement already existed.
No, that is like saying that the 30% increase in hospitals funding, well, there was hospitals funding before, so therefore it doesn't matter. I tell you what, it does.
No, I'm not saying, but you've got a new agreement.
It does.
It was possible.
It's a new agreement with new parameters and the involvement of APONT, which, with respect, you sort of just slide past.
No, I don't. Aboriginal control.
That means it's a very different framework. It's one that gives that sense of ownership and participation, and that's how you will make a difference. The Closing the Gap agreement, that's a national agreement that's been in place for some time, hasn't been delivered. I pay tribute to Pat Turner and the Peak Coalition of Peaks is doing hard work, but the Peak organisation here, through APONT, their engagement will make an enormous difference.
Yeah.
What we know is...
But this is the refunding of the NT-RAY, right? Okay, so there's more money, but is it possible this may not have been signed? Is that possible the money may not have continued?
Well, under the former government, when I came to office, there was no agreement for community services funding here in Alice or in other parts of the Northern Territory. That was basically a budget fiddle, what that was.
So what would have happened if this agreement had not been signed?
Well, my government was always going to get things done because my government does that.
But if it hadn't been signed, what would have happened on the ground?
Well, it needed to be delivered, and my government gets things done, whether it is with state or territory governments of whatever persuasion, the agreements that we have in place now on housing, on schools, on the Central Australia Agreement of $250 million, this agreement of $842 million. My government is about outcomes and making a difference to people's lives, working across the three levels of government, but also importantly, working with communities who are directly affected. And we have the same approach, whether it is working with the health sector, or whether it is working with schools across the country, or whether it be working with remote communities here in the NT.
What's new? What's new under the agreement? As I said, there's continuation of some funding which is under the old 𝙳𝙴𝚂𝚗𝙸𝙿𝚃𝙸𝙿𝚃𝙸𝚾. We now have APOINT involved, but what's new in this funding? What is going to be funded which wasn't previously funded?
I'll give you just one example. Family and children's centres, 12 of them throughout the territory. The 8 different jobs, training and business hubs as well. That is new funding, new programs that will make a real difference to people, because they will have that ownership and engagement on the ground. We know in the past we need to learn the lessons. When people in Canberra just decide things divorced from people on the ground, you don't get the outcomes that people with the best of intentions might be aiming for.
Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians Jacinta Price and the Coalition have promised to audit all federally funded Indigenous programs. How can you guarantee that this money actually is closing the gap as you hope? I mean, what's the evidence it's going to close the gap?
What's interesting is the politics being played here.
It's a political game, let's be honest. It's an election campaign.
The Commonwealth have audit processes in place through the Australian National Audit Office, audits programs. We've given it record funding to do its job.
So what were the measurable outcomes under the old 𝙳𝙳𝚂𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗? What did that achieve?
The idea, well, clearly this agreement is a much more improved one. I'll be meeting, after this interview, I'm meeting the Mayor once again, Matt Patterson. I'm meeting with Darren Clark. I'm meeting with people here in Alice as well, to hear directly from them, as well as, of course, Marion Scrimgeour is an amazing local member here. She covers such a vast area in the electorate of 𝙳𝙂𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗 all of my ministers are fully aware of what's happening on the ground here.
If you can't win Lingiari, it's a 1.7% margin for Labor. It was been redistributed. You've lost Palmerston's been moved into Solomon, so it's 1.7% margin. If you lost Lingiari, would that mean essentially you probably would have lost the election? Because if there's a swing on in Lingiari, is it quite possible that'll be the end?
Well, Lingiari is, with respect, a very different place from my electorate of Grainler.
No doubt about that.
So one of the things about Lingiari that I'm very confident about is that people will back in Marion. She's an experienced former minister in the NT government. She's done an extraordinary job here representing the community. Wazza, Warren Snowden, who I
can't keep bringing the ghost of Wazza back.
No, he did a great job. Marion has carried on that legacy, but done it with her own style and her own capacity to deliver. And if you look at the delivery in this electorate, frankly, it is unsurpassed of anyone who has represented this seat.
Big problem in terms of the elections of recent years. The turnout of Indigenous voters, usually strongly pro-Labor, in the NT has been in a death spiral. The last NT election, Bush seats were getting 40% voter turnout. That suggests Aboriginal people don't have a reason to come out and vote. So why should Aboriginal voters come out and vote for Labor at this next election? Because they're not turning out. They didn't turn out for Labor at the last election, the last NT election either.
Well, I'll make 2 points. One is that you look at the delivery, including today's agreement. We are continuing to do our best as a national government to close the gap. In a magnificent advocate in Marion Scrimgeour, you won't get anyone better. And I'll make this point as well. There was a conscious decision by the former government to discourage the capacity of people in remote communities to vote.
But people aren't voting. They're just not voting.
Well, there was a conscious decision a cutting of funding of the Australian Electoral Commission to get people on the roll, a cutting of funding for the way that people vote.
And have you rectified that?
Yes, we have. The way that they vote in those remote communities. And that was a decision taken out of a playbook that has taken place in some other democracies as well, of deliberately making it more difficult for people who are disadvantaged to vote.
It's 9:20. You're on ABC Alice Springs. We are vibing, but we're vibing with the PM right now. Now, a number of listeners have asked this question. Looking at the money story. Now, the CLP government has inherited an $11 billion debt from Territory Labor. Now, the new government says they're going to break their legislated $15 billion debt ceiling. The Commonwealth already provides 80% of the NT's income. At what point do you say enough is enough? We are running up per capita more debt than any other jurisdiction. We are still a creature of the Commonwealth as a Northern Territory, as we are a territory of the Commonwealth of Australia. When do you say enough to debt? Because do you have to bail us out at some point?
Well, the NT government need to work through their issues.
What should they do? More tax.
Well, have a look at what my government did, which is to turn a $78 billion Liberal debt into a $22 billion Labor surplus and follow it up with another surplus.
But does it become your problem? $15 billion, does that become your problem?
You need to make sure that you are responsible in your expenditure. We have done that, making sure that we turned around those issues. We've cut debt by about $200 billion while we've delivered cost of living relief, whilst we've delivered really important programs such as the ones here in the Territory.
Now, just this morning, we've heard that the corrections in the Northern Territory are talking about bringing in private contractors to work as corrections officers. One listener, Kim's, asked the question, are you aware of the situation with the overcrowding and the conditions in the Northern Territory prison system? And as we heard from the union, corrections officers who are private officers, not corrections staff, are going to come into the system. Are you aware of the problems? Is there something you would advise the Northern Territory government maybe not to privatise the system?
Well, I'll make 2 points. One is I'm aware of it. The second is I'm the Prime Minister and not the Northern Territory Chief Minister.
You have a lot of influence in the NT.
I'm not the Northern Territory Chief Minister. I'll leave that to the Chief Minister. I seek a constructive relationship with the NT administration. I've been to the Territory 3 times since just before Christmas. We had a good meeting.
Should prisons be privatised?
That's a matter for the Northern Territory.
Okay.
I've got a big job. That's
fine.
I'm not looking for additional jobs.
Something which should affect you. The gallery, the 𝙳𝙴𝚂𝙲𝙸𝙿𝚃𝙸𝙾𝙽, formerly the NARG here in Alice Springs, budget 147 million. 80 million of that is your money. The CLP have now shrunk the project, stuck it on a site that is currently a car park. Are you happy with your money to be spent that way?
Well, our money is allocated. It's capped at $80 million. One of the things...
But the project's much smaller now. Is that good or bad?
Well, we want the project to be as good as possible, clearly.
Have you seen what they're offering?
That's why we made the commitment that was there. I want tourists, whether they be from other parts of Australia or from internationally, to be attracted towards coming to Alice Springs. That's one of the ways that you build the economy here and create jobs. And there is magnificent art here in the Territory.
You're preaching the converted Prime Minister, but the question remains, you're happy with how the money's been spent with the shrunk-down gallery stuck in what is now a car park?
Well, Tony Burke is the Arts Minister. I haven't... with respect, I haven't micromanaged the plans of every project around
Catherine
the country.
King wants to see the plans, and it's interesting. Marion Scrimgeour has suggested...
it's reasonable that she...
Yeah, absolutely. But Marion Scrimgeour has suggested the feds take control of the project, increase the funding to ensure it's truly a national gallery. Would you support that?
Well, we have $80 million on the table.
And that's all?
That's what we have on the table. That's a pretty substantial commitment, I've got to say, to an art gallery.
One listener just saying, what are you going to do about gambling ads? Are you going to really get tough on this? Because it's been recommended you do.
Oh, we're going to continue. We have done more on gambling than any government since Federation, including introducing
When will you
BetStop.
follow the recommendations which would see gambling ads pretty much got rid of? When are you going to agree to that?
We've done... Well, what we do as a government is we work through issues, and we've already done BetStop. We've banned credit card use on gambling. We've changed the benign statement that used to be made, gamble responsibly, with letting people know they would lose. And we're engaging with all of the stakeholders to do more. We know there's more to be done.
Question from the Mayor of the Barkly Regional Council, 𝙳𝙴𝚂𝙸𝙿𝚃𝙸𝙾𝙽. He said, PM, you recently came to Lake Nash in the Barkly. Given you didn't meet with the community at that time, we'd love to host you in the region. Will you be heading to Tennant Creek in the Barkly, as 𝙳𝙳𝚂𝚑𝚗𝚗 has asked?
I will get around the country as much as I can. As I said, 13 visits to the Northern Territory, and I was there at Lake Nash at the station there. It was a great day, I've got to say, and they were very gracious hosts. And I've got to say, I don't think I've had a better steak for lunch either.
I suspect you're not going to tell me when the election date is, but we are heading to an election. The polls have not been in your favour in recent time. Your popularity and Labor's has been sinking. Australians feel as though they're battling a cost of living crisis at the moment. Normally, a first-term government would be reasonably confident, but I think you're claiming underdog status at this point. Isn't it a bit dumbfounding that a first-term Prime Minister is claiming underdog status? And does that do you recognise that you're a bit on the nose with the electorate?
Yeah, you're verbling me there.
Well, that's my job. But
it's not actually. It's not the job of the ABC. There's enough other media outlets.
I'm trying to
engage
get you
in that.
But would you accept underdog status?
I'm confident that we will form a majority government after the next election. If you look at any opposition that was about to form government at this stage in the cycle, then they are way ahead of a government of the day.
Do you agree that a lot of people in the electorate are feeling hurt and they feel as though Labor is the problem?
There's been,
you're the problem.
Under a global inflation pressures, many cost of living pressures are there for people. That's why we've acted on it. But all of the action that we've taken, whether it be the tax cuts for every single one of your listeners, whether it be cheaper medicines where people have saved $1 billion, cheaper childcare saved.
Why aren't they listening? Why are they not listening?
$700. Well, maybe because you won't let me get out.
You've got to say quite a bit, Prime Minister.
Energy bill relief, all of those things that we have done. If Peter Dutton had his way, people would have been $7,200 worse off. And if Peter Dutton is elected, he said on the Insiders program on ABC on Sunday, there'll be cuts, but he won't tell you what they are until after the election. We know last time he went after health and wanted to trash Medicare. We will strengthen Medicare. I'm confident that when people focus on what this election is about, the government will be re-elected.
Yeah. Interesting. I thought you were going to go at me for verbling you over being on the nose with the electorate as opposed to being an underdog, but that's okay. Can I ask you one last thing?
Well, whatever. There's enough people join in. And there's a bit of a media, and the ABC join in on it sometimes.
Okay.
I've got to say.
The one thing we are going to give you a parting gift, Prime Minister. There is a parting gift for you. You've taken a good part of our riffology vibing program. So I've asked you a key riff, a great riff you want to hear. You get a request on ABC Alice Springs. That is not something which we give away lightly.
I have hosted Rage before.
I know. I know. This is comparable.
This is
comparable.
And am responsible for 𝙳𝙃𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗𝚗
Absolutely, we're all much younger. PM, what's your riff today?
Camp Dog by King Stingray.
Good choice. Thank you, PM.
It's actually a great little...